Ethics, where we'll be taking our first topic on the introduction to AI ethics. We're glad to have you here. As AI attempts to transform industries, shape the way we work, interact, create, and even influence our perceptions of the world, the need for AI ethical considerations has never been more crucial. Imagine a world where AI diagnoses illnesses, where it steers autonomous vehicles, or it even influences our financial decisions. The potential benefits of AI are those that we cannot ignore, and questions on fairness, accountability, privacy, and responsible development of these systems will arise from time to time and have even begun creating some complex problems. Ultimately, the goal of this webinar will be to equip ourselves with the necessary tools and knowledge that we need to know how to navigate AI systems and address these problems as they arise. The question we ask ourselves today: pave the way for AI's tomorrow and ensure that rather than a threat, it is a force for good. So I'll quickly give us the vision and mission statements of the Pan-African Center for AI Ethics. Our vision is shaping the future of Africa through ethical AI design and use. And our mission, the center's mission, is to ensure that AI design, deployment, and usage in Africa are in alignment with ethical standards and African values. This will be achieved through comprehensive research, training programs, active advocacy, and thoughtful policy formation. So now I'll be introducing our speaker, Kingsley Owodara, and he will be taking us on the introduction.
Thank you very much, Lois, and welcome to this webinar. And I believe that we are all going to have a great time here together. And I believe everybody can hear me, so we just go straight to the point. I'll be sharing my screen, and hopefully you are able to see my screen just in a moment. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right. This is just a beginner's course, and we do not intend to go so deep into what AI ethics is all about. It's just to have a background knowledge on how to navigate the complexities of ethical AI. Some persons might call it responsible AI. Some persons might call it trustworthy AI. Some persons might call it human-centric AI. So whatever it is that you're familiar with, AI ethics, trustworthy AI, responsible AI, human-centric AI, and all the likes, anyone that you are familiar with, they're all the same thing. They all mean the same thing, and there is no cause for alarm to think what is what and whether it is the same thing or it's not the same thing. All right. Before I just go into this particular course, I want you to just take a look at some few case study that would drive this point home. Okay, I'm sure that you'll be wondering what exactly it is to what AI ethics is and what it means when you hear people talk about it. So I have like 4 cases that can help drive the point home. I think this happened last week about the Meta Oversight Board warning on the rules on fake posts, and posts are incoherent. And also, if you're following the news, you would also see the protest by parents talking about the things that Meta's platform has done to their children. And these are things that have to do with the core of their ethics and seeing how platforms have made their what are the rules that govern platform, especially on usage. So we see that AI ethics is not just a thing that has to do with modeling of AI, but it has to do with all through the life cycle of an algorithm. I refer to modeling, um, training, modeling, deployment, and even usage that follows through all the life cycle and let's go on. We also see another one because you see AI is something that has not been used in almost everyday life. AI is just for our everyday life. So we also see another scenario from Amazon, talking about the Amazon recruiting app that should bias against women, just women. So whenever the algorithm detects your CV or your resume as a woman, it automatically has some form of integrated bias, and it treats you differently. It treats you differently from your male counterparts. We also see another example on the question of killer robots. And the question is, should we use killer robots? Is killer robot legal or illegal? These are things that are ethical. These are things that should be ethical. These are things around ethics, right? And then the last one, this is much better now on the Google algorithm, where if you search for things around CEO, you'll see more male gender than feminine gender. I mean, it's better now. It's better now. If you search things around um, poor child, automatically you will see a black young African begging for food on the streets. And if you search around, but there was even a time that it was more prevalent where the algorithm detected a black couple as gorilla. So if you search gorilla or chimpanzee on the search, what you'd see would be pictures of blacks and not pictures of monkey. So all these things are things that forms the mind of people that, oh, so Africa are full of monkeys. We've read instances where people were told to even remove their clothes to see whether there is tail, to see whether there is tail in their body, just to show that Africans are monkeys, there are tigers and lions living there, and all these things. As much as we're talking about AI, right? But these are things that affect people's perception about certain gender, certain age, certain race, and because people are now using technology, this thing invariably built in us. And this also affects a democratic government where democracy has to do with voting your leaders in, right? Constitutional democracy where you can vote people in. I mean, when ethics is not properly imbibed, you see that AI itself can influence people's decision in election. It can influence people's decision. It can influence who is in government, and can even influence how the governed behave towards the president, towards our government. So these are things that if not properly handled, they are threats to democratically elected governments, right? They are threat to democracy. They are threat to human rights. They are threat to self-esteem. They are threat to even the economy of a state of a country. They are threats. So it's really important that we these are things that are fundamental when it comes to AI ethics, and see now these algorithms can really be used for good and just good alone. All right. So the next scenario I want to bring up is this particular machine. So the first scenario I brought out was a question of artificial intelligence itself, and this particular scenario, you see this self-driving car and a person trying to cross the car, and then you see there's a pool of electricity inside. So the question is, what decision should the machine make? Should it run over the person trying to cross? Should it run over the pool that are there? These are so some persons might say that no, it's a self-driving car. It can choose to stay. Yeah, it can choose to stay when it is driving slowly. And what about it on full speed and something like that happens? What decision should it make? I also want you to know that AI in itself is not 100% efficient, right? And if it is 99.9% efficient, the 0.1 in the errors that it's going to make, we can't tell the impact of what the 0.1 is going to be. So this is a question of ethics, right? That has to do with conscience. What should you do? A human might, even if it's a human that is driving the car, right? There are several persons and several decisions that they would likely make. So the decision this car might make would be one could be premised on several reasons. One, either by virtue of what the programmers are programming to be. Should this run over a person than run over a pole? Number two, the decision is going to make would be also premised on what is the policy, what is the philosophy of the company that developed it. What do they cherish? What is their culture, right? Also, the decision is going to make will be premised on the developers. What is the person's value? Does the person value the worth of the car over the worth of a person's life? And then the last thing you consider is that what's the accuracy of the car? So you see, these instances, even what's the law of the country? Does the law of the country value a child more than a person crossing, or the law of the country values a tool, a machine, more than a person? So you see, all these things all together are things that really influence ethics, right? On conscience, because everybody's conscience is different. And what we tend to do is different. I mean, my decisions can never be a decision. Since AI itself does not develop itself, human develops it. So it makes it very, very tactical to determine what decision should a machine take when it is faced in a dilemma. But when we're even talking about this AI, what is AI in itself? I think that would really help us to drive the point home. So I quote from OECD 2023, said AI is a system. An AI system is a machine-based system that, for explicit or implicit objectives, infer from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. Different AI systems vary in their level of autonomy and adaptiveness after deployment. So you see that from this definition, we see that AI cannot create itself. Though people have predicted that in coming days, machines will begin to build machines. But and we're already seeing that now, even from ChatGPT, right? Foundational models where there's a foundation, and then the foundation can be used to build others. But I believe that in the coming days, there will be more autonomy where with just few prompts, machines can build machines with little or no human input. But the big deal here is that at a foundation, human built machine with implicit or explicit objective. And these machines can now generate outputs like predictions, for instance, in terms of weather forecast, content, for instance, in terms of a LLM, generative models, recommendations, for instance, some Gen AIs also give recommendation, or decisions, for instance, in LAMs, large action models that make decisions for you, books your flight, books your ticket, tell you what to do, right? Make decisions that can influence physical, and whatever the decision is, right? They have the capacity to influence what happens in both physical environment or virtual environments. And these machines also have what we call the level of autonomy and adaptiveness after deployment. The problem have always been the black box. So if you're saying that there is an objective that is built in a model, there's likelihood that people, programmers, companies have a way they could hide things in machines that we don't know, users don't know. What users are usually particular about is that if I click on this tab, does it work? Yes, it works. That means it's talking about the responsiveness. Also, it's responding, and then everybody's good to go. So it's really important that we take note of that. So prior to now, it has always been the question of we don't want to know how you do it. What is most important is that is it working? Yes. Is it taking? Is it performing the set objective? Is it giving what I want? Yes, it is. And then let's forget about it. But when people are seeing that these things are already perpetuating bias, so people are saying, okay, we are glad that this is working, but tell us more about this thing. If you are saying I should cross the road, why? Right? If you are saying that I should make more subscriptions to let's say for instance, my Apple Music, why? You're recommending that I should store my photo in the cloud. Why? Give me more explanation. Okay, if I've stored it, what is going to happen after storing it, right? So people begin to demand more explanations than just it works, it doesn't work. Now, that's actually the black box issue. But on the question of ethics, right, we see that ethics is based on well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribes what human ought to do, usually in terms of rights, obligations, benefit to society, fairness, or specific virtue. So we see that ethics differs just as human conscience differs. Ethics differs from place to place, from person to person. And that is why you see that um, because ethics differ, we need to have a standard. What is the minimum standard that everybody can agree on? We know that we all have multiple conscience. I can say killing of I can say killing is too extreme, an extreme instance. I can choose that I want to wear my jean jacket and button it up. You can choose that you want to wear a jean jacket and open it up, leave the chest open. You can choose that okay, my jean jacket I'll hang it on my neck. Other persons can decide to hang it on their waist. I mean, we all have valid reasons why we want to wear like that. So the question is that okay, if you are dealing with algorithms, what is the minimum standard everybody should follow? And that is why we are talking about this AI ethics, having a standard for deployment, development, deployment, training, and use. What is the standard we should use, right? All right. So why AI ethics? I've given this while I was talking earlier. I've made mention of most of these things. So the potential for harm. I mean, I talked about their threat. They can be threat to human rights. They can be threat to a democratic government. They can even be threat to the psychological well-being of children, vulnerables. They can be threat to so much things, right? And then the question of the scale of their impact. Just imagine in the instance of Cambridge Analytica, where this thing is used to determine the fate of a nation in the next 4 or 5 years, right? Those are even extreme cases. I refer to when AI is deployed in medical line and the machine decides to go south, it means a human life is at stake. Right? So we see that there is scale of impact. We see the question of social impact, just as we saw from Facebook, where parents are demanding for accountability on how these machines are used. And this also was, I think, at the time that TikTok was having the same issue, right? On the impact on children. We also see the economic impact. We also see the cultural and societal biases, where it tends to distinguish one culture from another culture. That this culture are bad people, this culture are good people. This area is a bad place. This place is highly volatile, and people begin to have diverse notions about some cultures. You know, and then we also see the question of the long-term safety, the moral responsibility, legal and regulatory concerns. I mean, I've spoken about all this while I was talking earlier. An artificial intelligence algorithm can be precise. We need to take note of this, right? Artificial intelligence algorithms can be precise in mathematical accuracy, yet devoid in rational analysis or sound judgment. Hence, they need to imbibe ethics while modeling. So you can do a good job while you're trying to, do like a mathematical prediction of a model. I refer to all your statistic analysis. You're trying to put your statistics. You're putting all your codes, and then everything is working well. Yes, everything can be working well when it talks about functionality. When it comes to sound, rational, and moral judgment, it can be void of it. So that's why it's really important that we talk about this ethics, right? Okay. So we see that because we are saying that we are trying to get a standard for this, we have seen several levels or layers of standards being made. I refer to um, international organization because we see that there is no a codified AI law. I mean, um, the EU Act was just signed, and but prior to then, there was no codified law on artificial intelligence. So because there is no law, there is no way you can hold anybody accountable for any law because we see that law has what we call has the capacity to most law have like what would I call it enforcement mechanisms. Yes, So law have an enforcement mechanism where you can actually hold people accountable when things are not doing the way it ought to be. So many international organizations have come up with ethical recommendations. We see, for instance, I quoted from the OECD organization for OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation. Um, sorry, I missed that. I would drop a comment about that. Think of the Organization for Economic Commission, Cooperation, Development, something like that. Yeah, so what was that?
I think it's development, the last one, development.
All right. We also see they came up with their ethical recommendations. We also see from UNESCO. UNESCO also have the AI recommendations, right? And from the international organization level, we also see we slim it down to organizations having their own ethical principles. So we see that the one for the international can just be a raw ethical principle. Then bringing that to organization, they can have something more slimmer and something they could adapt to. For instance, let me give you something that can guide you, right? If you check apps like Google have their ethical principle. If you check Microsoft, you can see Microsoft ethical principle. You can check Duolingo. Yes, Duolingo also have like some form of ethical principle, just to show you how they do what they do and how they implement, they imbibe ethics in what they are doing. And it's really important that organizations are encouraged to come up with ethical principles just for the purpose of for the sake of accountability on how they use what they use, right? So I'll just run through this ethical principle. As I've mentioned, it is just a summary introduction class. So this is not a broad class. First starting with privacy. We see that and I generated these principles based on like the what is common. I mean, what the common principle in all these recommendations and all these organizations and international organizations. So, from the question of privacy, why do we have to consider privacy as an ethical principle? So if you see, for instance, laws in Africa, majority of the constitution in Africa have what we call protection of privacy. Right? They'll tell you that everybody's entitled, every citizen is entitled to the protection of their privacy and property. Now, privacy, the question of privacy and property, and then privacy as at when most of these constitutions were written, were just streamlined towards your your home and your personal belonging. But as time begins to go on, we see that the question of property and privacy has evolved, and then the constitution is now like a basis, a foundation for further writings or for further laws to come up for privacy. Now, how does this come to AI ethics? We see that an algorithm basically is data is a building block for an algorithm, and without data is like the blood of an algorithm, and most of these algorithms can have a way it begins to peep or spy or monitor people that are meant to use, and their privacy begins to become an issue. Their data are used for what ought not to be, and so it's really important that as a fundamental right, not just an ethical principle, as a fundamental right, privacy is essential in to ensure that these things do not go beyond what they ought to go, right? They do not go beyond what they ought to go. The next thing I'll talk about is the fairness. What is fairness? Now, I know that there are several fact sheets on fairness, but and just to mention, right, this discussion, AI ethics discussion, is both a socio-technical discussion. I refer to it is both social as to because it relates to the community, and it's technical because it relates to an algorithm that is technically developed. So there are things that relates to the socialness in quotes of the model and the technicalities of the model. So while privacy is more of a social discourse, though there's a bit of technical discourse because I've seen for instance, the IBM have what we call AIP, AIP 360, where you can use to actually you can actually use it to detect the metric of privacy in an algorithm, right? But fairness is more of a technical thing because it has to do with the decision about an algorithm. So if you are saying cross or no cross, like how fair is this decision? How fair? I mean, for instance, if we made mention of the Amazon recruiting tool, Amazon recruiting tool that was biased in nature, right? We ask ourselves is it really fair? Is it fair? And most times to detect fairness, it's not a matter of conscience now. I mean, we all have multiple conscience. No, we don't detect fairness that way. What we look at in fairness is that to detect fairness, you consider um, that's what we call um, there's a word for it, right? So you look at several attributes. You look at protected, yeah, you look at protected attributes and unprotected attributes. So what is the decision of this algorithm when protected attributes are disclosed? What is the decision of this attribute when unprotected attributes are disclosed? Let me explain what protected and unprotected attributes are. For instance, um, if I enter a form and I mention that I am a male, I'm this age, I'm this genotype. Okay, these are things that in your Data Protection Act they call it sensitive data, right? As to medical reports, as to age, as to your person. So if these attributes are disclosed, what is the decision of this algorithm? If these attributes are not disclosed, what is the decision of this algorithm? So you put the two together and weigh it. Okay, is it fair? So that way you are able to put on a balance. How fair is this decision over another? I know it's a bit technical, but over time, I'm sure that in coming days would have a another session on it. But this helps you to detect whether it is biased or not biased, because you can't just sit down with your mental calculation and detect whether a thing is biased or not. How? Is it with your conscience? Obviously, no. You can't get accuracy because what is biased to me, it's not biased to you. So it's really good that you check this out through a technical means, whether you are by disclosing a protected attribute and disclosing an unprotected attribute and measuring the metrics. And just to mention, right, there are several fairness metrics that has been developed by several organizations over time. I refer to metrics like equalized odds, metrics like um, um, several metrics. I can't recall most of them now. Like several metrics for detecting fairness check, and then there are also um, several tools you can use. For instance, you have like the AIF 360 by IBM. You see like the responsible AI dashboard by Microsoft. You see like I think Google also have their own. They also have their own fairness check, right? But that's all about fairness. On the question of transparency, transparency now, I discussed that AI ethics is not just about deployment, it's not just about modeling or training. It also has to do with deployment and use. So on the question of transparency, transparency has to do more with on an organization level, being showing how the data collected how they are being used. And I think that the integrity of transparency is imbibed, is infused when they talk about their terms of use, their privacy policy. Right. So all this data you're gathering, how do you use it? You know, how do you how do you build your algorithms? What are the principles behind your work? So that's just a brief about transparency. On explainability, explainability now has to do with you know how do you explain how do you explain the outcome of the model decision to a user, right? How can they understand it? Are you saying that because behind the scene, what we can see is your asterisk, your parameters, your class, and all those stuff while you're coding it, right? That's what you can see, and all the training and all the can see that, but as a user, they don't understand what you're talking about. So the question of explainability is how do you bring this as very, very easy to a person to explain? On safety, I gave instances on parents, coming to Facebook to ask them about how do you guys do your stuff, and then how it has been a threat to their children. So safety is a very serious matter, because I think there was a time I read I read a post on a cross-border surveillance tool that over time that is being used for profiling. So when you're crossing the border of this particular country, they profile you, and then because these tools were built with a different data, right? People that were not trained, people that their color of skin were not trained with that tool, there's likelihood that they will be profiled, and a person that never did anything because of the color of your tool will be dictated as criminals or dictated as something else, right? And then we also see when it comes to credit check, right? So it's really important that to keep people safe, you are able to confirm that this tool is safe, whether virtually or when deployed into a physical environment. On the question of interpretability, how are people able to interpret your model? Now, explainability has to do with you. Interpretability has to do with the user. How are people able to interpret this model? How easy it is, right? I wouldn't talk much about that. Also on accountability. Accountability now has to do with the company to the government, right? Accounting for, being truthful. You have already said that I'm transparent about these things, right? I'm transparent about these things. Can you give account of how your transparency, how you are sticking to transparency, right? You are saying that you are giving, and that's why you do. That is where the question of algorithm audit comes in, right? Just as we have like a data protection impact assessment. Yeah, that is where your algorithm audit comes in, to detect the level of your accountability to your model. Now, on the question of robustness is that we are building this tool to be robust enough that under any given condition, it gives the same output. Whether you are using it in Africa, and then we have this in this context in Africa, you're using it in Nigeria, you're using it in Ghana, you're using it in Zimbabwe, Southeast, West, Middle Africa, and the like. So are getting the same result, and it's robust enough to handle all situations that pertains to the sector you are deploying it into. This is just like a brief rundown of these ethical principles, right? To understand this better, you can do a further reading on the Universal Guideline for AI. You can do the OECD AI principle, the G20 AI guideline, the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, the EU AI Act, and the Council of Europe AI Convention. That would help you understand this better. My final note, the full cycle of a machine learning project is not just modeling. It is finding the right data, deploying it, monitoring it, feeding it back into the model, showing safety, feeding it back into the model, showing safety. This goes beyond doing well on the test set. So as much as you are testing your data, it goes beyond it. We are making sure that this thing actually work in real life, using the right data and deploying it. And that's all from me. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer. Thank you. Over to you, Lois.
Thank you very much, Kingsley. I really enjoyed the session. Um, I did want to ask a question, right? Just for clarity's sake. So I remember you mentioned when you were talking about like fairness, you said something on, you know, children and parents being concerned about the safety of their children's data. So I wanted to find out, does that mean, or are you trying to say that, when we talk about things like safety, there would have to be like special considerations for some, will I say, marginalized groups of people or special groups of people like children, maybe Black people, like you mentioned, there's some form of discrimination in these models.
Yes, right. So when you're deploying, when these algorithms are being modeled, we need to tell ourselves, to be sure to know that you need to understand the peculiarity of the people you are deploying it to, and also to understand the vulnerability of society. Because when we talk about ethical AI, we're talking about being human-centered. For instance, let me give a relatable instance. the way you would treat an adult as to autonomy of decision, right? It's not the same way you treat children. It means that even the law gives consideration on people that is usually considered as vulnerable, especially in contract. Contract tell you that you must have the capacity to enter legal relations, right? So you look at it that this person you are making this, does this person really understand this thing? And are there things that would make their decision otherwise? So all these things are really important to take note of so that you are making sure, because these things are being deployed for a human, and making sure that humans really use this and it's beneficial to human. Because some persons also refer to this as what we call AI for good. We're ensuring that this AI is built for good and is used for good. So yes, you consider the peculiarity of people that would use the act, that would use the algorithm.
Thank you. Sorry, the second question was just for clarity's sake again. So what you're trying to say in essence today is that aside from just like developers, people that design these systems, that that's like a role that other people have to play, like human beings have to collaborate in some ways, right? We have some form of inputs that we have to bring to using these AI systems, regardless of whatsoever field we're working in or whatsoever, area we find ourselves specializing in.
Yes, right. So the question of AI ethics actually is, as I've said, it is not just about it's not just about the the developers alone. Everybody have a part to play, and I'm sure I don't know whether you've heard about something like something called the feedback loop, right? Where where people actually get to after using the algorithms, the algorithm trains itself based on the input of the user, because at first you use data to train, and afterwards you use the input of users to further train the data. So it's to train the model. So it's good that ethics is not just for the modelers or for the modeling company, but also for the users. You know, just imagine, for instance, the use of generative AI. Now we've seen people now asking terrible questions on generative AI. How can I become a billionaire in 2 days? How can I become the president of US? How can I kill XYZ? How can I mean, these are unethical use. So it's good that we as users also are ethical in our use of these algorithms.
Thank you very much for that clarity. I believe we've come to the end of this session, and I hope that we've been able to clarify a lot of questions that you may have had on AI ethics. Um, Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Bye.